Respected ladies and gentlemen, today I am going to talk about the topic that unchecked liberalism is threatening the law and order of the U.S. Cries of the defund of police, picture of statue of our founding father being demolished, and rampant defacing of public property have plastered our mainstream and social media over the last few months. As someone who has lived through the Cultural Revolution in South China during the 1960s and 70s, I want to share my story with you so you can see what a society without law enforcement, without the police, could become. The Cultural Revolution in China started in the 1966 when Chairman Mao decided to handicap the law enforcement and encourage the people to take matters into their own hands in order to weed out the class enemies. Many high school and college students in China at the time were quite radical, and at Mao's invitation, they formed a group of the Red Guards to eradicate the so-called class enemies that were hidden among them. As the world around me quickly descended into chaos, violence gripped people's hearts, and their anger were unleashed in such cruel ways. I was barely a teenager then, and I wish I could erase some of the horrors that have been imprinted on my mind's eye ever since. I saw my neighbors being tortured and publicly humiliated by their own children in what were known as struggle sessions. My favorite teacher pressed to the ground and beaten with the barrel of a gun by his students. In one horrific event, I witnessed the violent killing of a man who was visiting my village from another village. His brother married with a woman from my village, so he had come to visit his brother. Unfortunately, people from my village thought he was anti-revolutionary, so they hunted him down and shot him dead. The exact spot where he was murdered was only 100 meters from my childhood home. Sadly, the terrorization did not end there. The villagers went further by cutting off the victim's head. Then, one of the village leaders opened his chest to take his heart out because he had a rumor that human hearts could cure his asthma. In an even more gruesome act, he drank some of the warm blood, thinking that it would help too. Then he carefully wrapped the heart in his coat to bring it home. The following day, the living brother was cruelly forced to carry his dead brother's head back to their far-distant hometown to attend the struggle session. There, he was killed by local villagers, also in the name of anti-revolution. All throughout my childhood, these were the kinds of terrifying scenes I witnessed over and over as a result of living in a time without law and order. These events wounded my soul so sharply that for a long time I could not sleep without having nightmares. In countless Chinese cities, towns, and villages, millions of people inflicted unspeakable violence on their own family and friends, teachers, co-workers, and elders. They killed one another in the name of justice, but without law and order, the line between justice and personal grudge quickly became the blood. Like the China of the 60 years ago, the U.S. is facing a dangerous time today. The United States of America was founded on the unique promise of liberty and freedom. That is why for over the last 2 centuries, the U.S. have been drawing countless people to it, calling them to leave their homeland behind and come here to achieve the American dream. Looking back through the 3,000 years of Western history, starting with the ancient Greece and including the Hebrew and Roman Republic nations, we can see that the idea of liberty is deeply rooted in people's devoted faith in God. Our liberty is a sacred right given to each of us equally by the full authority of the loving Creator God. This idea of liberty is connected with personal obligations. The two are as inseparable as the two sides of the one coin. Our great nation is founded on both of these principles. However, as people have gradually grown apart from the profound faith in God the founders of this nation had, the ideas of liberty has been distorted into a secularized movement in the last several decades, and ideology of liberalism have gone unchecked. As a result, it seems like the many citizens and organizations emphasize people's freedom without having to meet one's personal obligations toward society and the rule of law. People used to think liberty meant having the freedom to say and do what they want, as long as it doesn't impede or invade another person's life or property. But nowadays, people are abusing the idea of liberty and claiming they have the freedom to loot, riot, burn, tear down statues, even shout and disturb people eating dinner at restaurants to question their position on social issues. This spirit of unchecked liberty is now seriously threatening the order and security of the United States. One example of this is the ceaseless and senseless riots that have happened in many cities around the country after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It is understandable and even worthy for so many people to protest the unfortunate killing of George Floyd by the police officer, because protesting is not only the proper display of American people's attention and dedication to every single individual rights to liberty bestowed upon each of us equally by God, but also it is within the bounds of rights to freely protest against the police abuse of power. However, many originally righteous protests have rapidly devolved into violent actions of the rioters, who senselessly destroyed buildings, looted stores and small businesses, and even injured children and seniors. Furthermore, rioters have torn down the statue of our founding fathers and other important leaders in our history, even those who fought voraciously for the rights of slaves and the immigrants. Ironically, the rioters that have taken place in many cities have been labeled as the tip of a spear for the Black Lives Matter movement and have been praised by the mass media and politicians who need the votes of Black Americans to survive and stay in power. Some politicians have even encouraged violent action, inciting rioters and Black Lives Matter supporters to occupy the downtowns of major cities such as Seattle, Portland, etc., and have even gone further by declaring their support for rioters' calls to defund the police. As I have said before, a society without law enforcement can be easily engulfed by mob violence and personal vengeance. The writing is already on the wall for those of us living in the US today. I absolutely wonder why some people in the US seem to want to go down a similar path as China did 60 years ago, with this wave of unchecked liberalism. I wonder why some mayors and even governors are so outspoken in their support of the occupation of their downtown public squares and the violent robberies and beatings of their fellow citizens. At times, I strongly doubt whether the US is still the same US that I had looked forward to retiring to ever since 1980s, when I had visited for the first time. Back then, I was deeply captivated by the US' secret belief in an idea of liberty, personal obligation, and law and order. I now wonder, is it still the country I've loved for almost 4 decades? Our founding fathers recognized that the right to protest the abuse of the law by individuals in power needed to be an invaluable part of a democratic process. But it is the rule of law and the idea that we all must adhere to the same set of the principles regarding freedom and personal obligation that keeps our society from going down the path of chaos and fear. This beautiful country was founded on these principles, guided by the deep and profound faith in a loving Creator who values all of people. It is this country that we need to return to, so that future generations do not have to experience what I experienced as a young boy. Thank you very much for your listening.